Father God in heaven, we thank you that you're the friend who sticks closer than a brother. We thank you that you're not a God who is indifferent or distant, but that you are near and involved and loving and caring. God, we thank you that you went to the greatest lengths to ensure that we would be together. Pray, God, that today you would teach us, you would grow us, you would make us more and more like your son, Jesus. We give you the thanks and praise ahead of time for what you're going to do. In Jesus' name, amen. If you have a Bible, would you go with me to the book of Numbers, chapter 20. Numbers, chapter 20. It's not often we open up the book of Numbers, I feel like. When I was a kid, I was terrified of the book of Numbers because I just thought, is this like good? Is this gonna be like just a bunch of numbers or facts or but it's actually got some really good storyline in it. And so we're gonna jump in the middle of the book of Numbers and just see what God has for us as we look at the life of a man named Moses. Numbers chapter 20 verse 1. And the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month. And the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now, there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished with our brothers, perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we should die here? Both we and our cattle," like their biggest concern, right? "What about the cows? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us into this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates. There's no water to drink." And then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take of the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water." Tell the rock to yield its water. "So you shall bring water out of the rock for them, and give drink to the congregation and their cattle." And Moses took the staff before the Lord as he commanded them. God says, you need water? I'm gonna have you speak to a rock. You need water? I'm going to have you just say the words, and we're going to let water come forth. You just say the words, speak to the rock. So Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, notice his tone, "Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them." These are now the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy. The people need water. Moses goes to God. God says, "Speak to the rock, and water will come out." Moses stands before the assembly of his people, angry, indignant. And instead of speaking to the rock like he was commanded by God, he strikes it with his staff. And we know this is no linguistic mistake here. It says he did it twice. He's not just mad, he's mad. You know the difference, right? Like when you're growing up, mom's mad, and then there's mom's mad. This is Moses. He's not just mad, he is mad. And so he grabs his staff and he looks at the rock that he was supposed to speak to, and he smacks it 2 times, and water comes forth from the rock, and it waters the cattle, and it helps the people, and everyone is able to drink. And then God takes Moses and Aaron for a side conversation, and he goes, hey guys, that's not what I asked you to do. And so now you won't be the leaders who take Israel from the wilderness into the promised land. Now you won't be the guys. Now, I don't know about you, but I read the Bible, and sometimes like God's response to things that I normally don't have issue with kind of freak me out. Like God gives Jonah this tree, and it grows out of the ground. It's this awesome moment. And then like he gets mad at Jonah, and all of a sudden like the tree just withers in front of him, and he sends a worm to eat it up. I'm like, that's kind of mean. I think about all the things that he sets up with Joseph, gets a coat of many colors, and he's got his father's favor, and it's going to be amazing. And then all of a sudden, like the next chapter, Joseph's brothers hate him, and they just throw him into a pit. And I'm like, God, like I thought you were setting him up for like success here. Why did these stories take a turn? And here's Moses. Especially for the Hebrew people in ancient culture and even today's culture, Moses was the man. He is the great, like Moses and Jesus walked in the garden with Elijah, and it's Moses. Moses is he's the one who led us out of Egypt. He's the one who took us to the promise. He's the one who established the Old Testament church. Moses led 2 million people out of slavery. He sent 10 plagues over Pharaoh and the Egyptian army. He parted the Red Sea and eliminated their enemy. Moses is the guy. And here we find him just a few years later, and God's like, hey, you are not the guy. You should have just spoke to the rock and said you hit it. You got some problems. You have some issues. And now because of those, and you've set me aside as unholy, I'm going to declare that I am holy in this place. And you and Aaron, you don't get to lead the assembly of my people into the promised land. The same man who came down radioactive from the mountain with 2 tablets and the 10 commandments is now told by the same God who came to him in a burning bush, you're not the guy. What changed? Like, where are all the second chances? Why didn't he get to see Canaan? Why didn't he get to continue leading? Why didn't he get a pass on this one? What's the big issue, God? Like, I'm missing something here. This guy on every surface of investigation looks like a winner. This guy looks like a winner. He set up the tabernacle, the place where God would dwell. He set up laws and systems. He judged the people. He called down manna from heaven to feed 2 million Jews in the wild. He's the leader of the Old Testament church. So what am I missing? Do you ever read the Bible and go like, oh, I don't get it? That's me as I read Numbers chapter 20. God, what am I missing? Moses, for all intents and purposes, Moses looks like the man. He looks like the guy. He was the chosen one. I feel like maybe what we're missing is found in Exodus chapter 3. Starting at verse 2, it says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him, and we've heard this story in all of the kids' church you've ever attended. If you've never heard of it, you've probably heard references to it. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, and it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight when the bush is not burned. And when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. I don't know why I did it like that, but Moses, there's God out of the burning bush. And if you've ever seen like the Prince of Egypt, you know what I mean? Like this is that moment. This is where the piano starts playing a little bit more heavy on the piano, and it gets a little bit bigger. And then there's the speaking, and then there's God. And he says, do not come near. Take the sandals off your feet, for the place which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look look at God. Can I get an amen? Like if I'm Moses and a bush is talking to me and there are flames involved and God's voice is speaking and he says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm going to be like, I'm sorry. Like I'm gonna just back up a few steps here. But then God, he does this thing that he does where he calls the people who are ill-equipped or underestimated, and he brings them out into something that we as Christians call calling. And he gives them this call. I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. And I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of a land a land to a good and broad land, a land that is flowing with milk and with honey, to a place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. And now behold, and this is where it gets intense, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come. Speaking to Moses, come. I will send you. I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, I will be with you, and this shall be given a sign for you that I have sent you. That when you brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Even in Moses' hesitation, I'm not the guy. I don't think I'm going to be able to pull it. You want me to go to Pharaoh? The next part of the conversations is he says, I stutter. I got this impediment in my speech. I'm not able to communicate. I can't be your mouthpiece on this planet. And God's like, don't worry about that. I have that already solved. Your brother Aaron's going to go with you, and then he's going to help you. He'll speak on your behalf. And it shows me that even in my excuses, even in my own insecurities and insufficiencies, that God's already thought all those things out. He sees past them, and he's actually providing a way for me to still be used in them and through them. He took Moses' dysfunction into consideration when he dispensed upon him his calling. Oh, I already thought of that. I've already thought this through. Don't you worry about the details. I'll work out the details. You just go. But notice his assignment. Moses' assignment is to take Israel out of captivity from Egypt, to deliver them from the hand of Pharaoh, and to take them to the land flowing with milk and honey. Moses' assignment, his commission from God, his calling on his life, his purpose he was created for, is to pick up the Israelites from captivity and in slavery in Egypt and then deliver them into the land flowing with milk and honey. That is his assignment. But in Exodus chapter 13, after Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go, and after Moses sends 10 different plagues, and the flies and the frogs and the blood and the water and the firstborn die, after all of that, and the Pharaoh lets the people go, and he takes them outside of Egypt, and he starts heading towards the promised land. The Bible tells us in Exodus chapter 13, verse 17, this is what it says. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. God said, I don't want the people to change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. In other words, God knows what wars you're not ready for yet. And so he goes, I'm going to get you to the promised land, but instead of going straight there, I'm going to take you by way of the wilderness and by way of the Red Sea. We're going to take a little bit of a detour here because you just got delivered from captivity, and I don't want the first thing you have to do once you've been delivered to experience heartache and warfare. And so I'm going to detour you to protect you. And he says this, but God led the people around by way of the wilderness towards the Red Sea, and the people went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. The whole purpose of Israel ever entering the wild, ever going into the desert, into the wilderness, was because God led them there to protect them from immediate warfare after being delivered from the Egyptian captivity. It was supposed to be a roundabout way to still get to the promised land. They were detoured to avoid an immediate battle. He was detoured as a leader. Moses, hey, I know it's a straight shot from here to there, but I want you to take them around towards the Red Sea. I want you to take them around towards, I don't want you to be in war. I don't want you to fight right away. Y'all aren't ready for that fight. You have a slave mentality. You have a captive mentality. You guys aren't ready to be assembled and to pick up arms. Like, you guys weren't even able to fight back in Egypt. You're not ready to fight back right now. So I'm going to take you around because I want to take you on this detour so that you could pick up some things along the way so that when you do get to the border of Canaan, you will be ready for a fight. And so what does he do? He takes them around to the Red Sea. And what do they see? They see the impossible take place. They see what they cannot overcome, what they cannot pass through, what is insurmountable. They see the Red Sea part in front of them. The entire nation walks through the Red Sea, and their enemies are drowned behind them who were in chase. And they got to see how huge and magnanimous and magnificent and all-powerful their God was. God wanted them in the detour of the desert and the Red Sea so that he could instill in them something now that they're going to need later. I'm putting something in you now in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the Red Sea, because in just a few days, you're going to show up to the border of the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and with honey, and I'm going to have you send some people in to look out and survey the land. And at that point, you're going to see those walls of Jericho. You're going to see the Amalekites. You're going to see the Nephilim sons. You're going to see giants. And if I don't take you through the detour of the desert and by way of the Red Sea, you might make the mistake of thinking that you're going to have to tackle all that on your own. But let me show you something you could never pull off on your best of days. Let me part a Red Sea. Let me make a way that you could never make for yourself, so that when you get to the border of the promised land, that place, that promise that I have given you, you won't have to be afraid. They're supposed to pass through the desert and pick up some assets. You pass through the desert. You pass through the wild places. You pass through the wilderness. You go through the Red Sea so that you can pick up some things as you pass through. You're going through that season and that situation and that hardship and the job loss and the sick. God is putting you through something, not because he wants to break you, but because he wants you to look around and pick up some things on that journey, because ahead is Jericho. And if you don't pick up the fact that God is with you and for you and is all powerful, you'll look at those walls and cower. Here's the problem. They actually get to the border. They send in 12 spies. They bring back the report. And remember what they said? There are armies. There are fortresses. There are cities. There are giants. All those things were true. None of those things were untrue. But then they added something on to the tail end of it. They said, and we felt like grasshoppers. The giants were real. The lie wasn't that there were giants. The lie was that they were grasshoppers. And their problem was that they passed through the desert and they went through the Red Sea and they saw the goodness of God and they saw his power and they saw the miracle and they saw and experienced the deliverance, but they didn't pick up what God dropped for them to receive as an asset. If I walk through the Red Sea and I see a wall like Jericho, I'll be like, if he can take that down, he can sure take that one down too. If I go through the desert and God eliminates all of my enemies in their chariots and drowns them behind me as I go through the impossible in my life, and then I see a giant, I'm supposed to have picked up the fact that God can do whatever he wants to do, whenever he wants to do it, and if he is for me, then no giant can be against me. Their problem was that they actually went through the desert, went through the wild, went through the Red Sea, that Moses took them through the delivering process from Egypt, but they didn't pick up what God wanted them to in the detour. And so they started what started as a detour of protection became an overwhelming distraction for the Israelites. All they saw was the desert. There's no food. There's no water. Our cattle are going to die. The enemies are great. And they're sitting around complaining. How did we end up here? Well, you're not supposed to end up there, Moses. This isn't where you were supposed to end up, Israel. But you stayed here because when you scouted out over there, you cowered and came back because you weren't willing to pick up in the desert what was going to get you through into your destiny. This was a detour. Moses, the wilderness was a detour, not a destination. It was just a roundabout way to get where we were going. You were supposed to pick up some things. It was supposed to allow God to work some things out, but you stayed there and you settled in. I mean, think about what Moses has done 40 years in the desert. So he sets up a tabernacle. God, we're going to build God a tent. And he starts rules and structure and laws. He's judging people. He's calling manna from heaven. He's talking and striking rocks for water. He has settled in. He is settled in. He was supposed to go through the desert, but instead he settled in. He was supposed to pick up some things about God and his character that was going to help him through the next phase of conquering the promised land. Can I ask you a question, church? What are you picking up as you pass through your season? What are you picking up right now as you go through hardship or even a good season of life? What are you picking up right now as you pass through the detour? Maybe this isn't what you planned. This isn't what you had in mind for this year or for that relationship or for the job. But what are you picking up right now in it? Yeah, maybe it's not the final destination, and I'm not going to be there or be here forever, but I'm here right now. What are you going to pick up in that season? Israel was supposed to pick up the fact that God could do anything when they went through the Red Sea. David, he shows up. Remember, Goliath is there, and his brothers are like, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh my gosh, why isn't anybody taking that guy out? And they're like, he's a giant. And what does he say? The shepherd boy. He picks up his sling and he said, the same God who delivered me from the mouth of a lion and the mouth of the bear is going to deliver me from this giant. Let it be so. He picks up his sling that he had picked up in the field and slays a giant. But some of us are showing up into our next battles without the slingshot that we should have picked up in our last season of life. Joseph doesn't get to the palace unless he's first in the pit, and he picks up the fact that God was for him and his hand was upon him. Elijah doesn't get to stand before the king and the queen of Israel, call them out for idolatry, turn around on Mount Carmel and see the entire nation on their faces worshiping God because of what he has done to show him and show them the love of God. He doesn't get to see all that unless he picks something up at the brook called Cherith first, that God would provide the fire. You ever wonder why he was so confident? How do you be so confident with the widow and the oil? And how do you be so confident in that situation? How do you be so confident that God would provide? Well, because he just went through Cherith where God gave him everything and he fed him with birds. How do you stand? How do you stand there and be so sure that God would raise that baby boy back from the dead? Unless you're confident, because you picked up in Cherith, that God would provide. How do you stand there on the top of a mountain with the whole world watching and ask God for fire and be confident of it? Unless you picked up in Cherith that he is a provider. How do you be confident on your knees, praying that God would take the cloud the size of a man's hand and pour out rain on the land of Israel, unless you are confident because you picked up something in Cherith that God knows how to provide? What are you picking up? What are you picking up as we go through the detour called 2020? What are you picking up right now? We're going through 2020. Nobody planned for this. We can all agree. But we're going through it. And we're taking our baby steps, 1 week at a time, one press conference at a time, one more, here we go, debate at a time. As we go through 2020, my question is to you, are you going to despise this year, or are you going to grow this year and go into the next season of our life, the next season of a church, the next season of your family, the next season of your relationship, having picked up a bunch of things about God and about you that are going to be of use in your next season? Far be it from us as Jesus followers to have gone through 2020 and it not changed us. To gone through 2020 and it not transformed us. Caused us to trust God more, to have more faith in his ability and his power and his love. Far be it from us to go through 2020 and not come out of it with assets that we can leverage to enter the promised land that God said he'd give us. Why is Moses being in trouble by God? Why? Hey, Moses, you're striking the rock. You're just, this isn't good. This is a problem. Why is Moses, and why is this such a big deal? And as I read this, I start to realize Moses settled in where he was meant to pass through. No wonder God's like, hey, dude, you're just not going to be the guy to lead. Moses, on the surface, he has got it all under control, but he has settled in the place where he was meant to pass through. Exodus chapter 18, and just a little bit of background here. His father-in-law, Jethro, comes to visit him. He's led Israel out of captivity. They parted the Red Sea. His father-in-law, a Midianite, comes to visit, and Moses tells him everything. Hey, God delivered us. He sent the plagues, and he killed their firstborn. And then he drowned them in the Red Sea, and he's brought us through. He's going to give us a promised land. It's going to be amazing. And Jethro is like, your God is the true God. Your God is the real God. And so he stays for a few days. And this is what happens in verse 13. After the conversation with his father-in-law, it says, the next day Moses sat down to judge the people. And the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw that, all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone, and why do the people stand around you all morning until evening? And Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me. Because the people come to me to inquire of God. And when they have a dispute, they come to me and I decide. I get to be the one who decides between one person and another. And I make them know the statutes of God and of his laws. And Moses' father-in-law said to him, what you are doing is not good. Because on the surface, Moses is the best leader. Moses, you set up the church, bro. You got us through the Red Sea. You make water come from rocks. There's manna coming from heaven. There's a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Moses, you are the guy who goes to the mountain and comes back with God's words, the 10 commandments. Moses, you are the leader. You are the man. In fact, Moses, anytime we have a dispute, anytime we have an issue, anytime there's a quarrel between us, we would like all of us to come to you and you tell us what to do. You tell us what to do in this wilderness. You're the judge over the people. And so we'll just, all day long, we'll just hound you with all these things. And Jethro, his father-in-law, who's lived a little bit more life than Moses, goes, so what are you doing? Oh, you see, Jethro, can I call you Ro? Hey, Jethro, The people trust me, and I've been a really good leader. And we've set up a tabernacle, and we're setting up our own laws and starting our own civilization and government, and it's going really, really well. I mean, they saw us part of the Red Sea. I made water come from a rock the other day. It's pretty amazing, and they just trust me. I'm their leader. And so if they need something, they come, and I give them my advice and my wisdom. I help them discern between right and wrong and the laws and of good and of evil and of God and of men, and how we're going to relate and how we're going to do this thing called life as a new country called Israel, and how we're going to enter to the promised land. And I'm just there all day, and his father-in-law looks at him and he goes, "What you're doing isn't good." Because some of us make the mistake of settling in places that we were supposed to pass through, and therein becoming really, really successful at something that doesn't really matter. And if you and I in 2020 don't attune ourselves to that concept, we can make the mistake of praising and celebrating other people's dysfunction because it looks like they're winning. That we can sit around and double tap and retweet and applaud from afar people who have settled in the places that they were supposed to pass through, but they got really good at it. And they're just really successful at it. My biggest fear in life is not trying and not succeeding. My biggest fear in life is succeeding at something that doesn't matter eternally. Is that not what Jesus said? What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but then loses his soul, the eternal thing about him in that process? On the surface, Moses is a winner. He is admirable. He has given them good things and good leadership, and he is a moral man, and he's got the admiration of the people. Our mistake as humans is that far too often we confuse faithfulness and fruitfulness. Faithfulness and fruitfulness. Isn't that the problem with our marriages in America? I'm just staying together right now for the kids. I'll just be faithful right now till the kids, go to college. And then you think because you're faithful that you're fruitful? You think because I show up to work and I'm always there and I'm the first one there and the last one to leave, you think because you're faithful that means you're fruitful? I go to school, I'm doing the things, I'm doing you think because you're faithful that you're fruitful? I go to church every week. I tune in every Sunday. Don't mistake faithfulness and fruitfulness. It doesn't matter if you're faithful if you are not standing in the place God called you. Moses, you're faithful. That is awesome. It is amazing. We love it. But I don't want you to be faithful in the desert. No, you're supposed to just scoot through here. I want you to be faithful in Canaan, because that's where it will matter. Can I say something? Don't get too comfortable. You know what my biggest fear right now in the language of our country and the language of the American church right now is this phrase, and you've heard it. Me and Ryan were making fun of it the other day. The new normal. Have you heard it? Hey, everyone, this is our new normal. Can I just throw this out there? This is anything but normal. But if we settle in 2020 when we're supposed to pass through it, it will become our new normal. So don't get too comfortable. Can I make you uncomfortable for a moment? Turn to your neighbor right now and say, he's going to go there. He's going to do it. Don't get so comfortable doing school on your bed. Don't get too comfortable having the work Zoom meetings in your boxer shorts. Don't get too comfortable with church online, because this was created to include you into community, not exclude you from it when we reopen. And don't get too comfortable with all the things going on in our world. Wearing a mask is not normal. Is it necessary? Sure. Is it normal? No. This is not our new normal. We're not going to settle in here in 2020 in the division and the racial tension and the no-maskers and the anti-maskers and all. This isn't normal. This year has been anything but normal. Don't you settle in where you were supposed to pass through. Don't get comfortable and lose sight of your calling. When you first met Jesus, you dropped in the $5 in the bucket at church and you felt amazing. But it's been 4 years, and you settled into a practice and not the promise. The Bible tells us how to give and how to be generous. That's not going to cut it anymore. That's not normal. You stayed in a place of generosity, and you're actually robbing God and yourself of the promise that he will not be outgiven. It was cute when you were a high schooler, but bro, you're 37 years old. Don't settle in where you're supposed to pass through. Don't settle in where you're supposed to pass through. I'm going to say it. I'm going there again. Girl, he was boyfriend material, not husband material, but you have settled in where you were supposed to pass through. You got comfortable. I'm just going to stay here. You know what our problem is? It's that we think because it looks admirable on the surface that we are successful in some small way, but we are actually celebrating our own dysfunctions, our own issues. Hey, Jethro, I don't know if you know this, but the people love me, and they're all lining up outside. I'm going to be here all day just helping them figure out their life. I'm such a great leader. And his father-in-law's like, bro, don't call me Ro. Anyway, bro, this isn't good. If what you just told me about Egypt and the Red Sea and God's miraculous way of delivering his people from slavery, and he does have a promise ahead of you, Moses, it doesn't matter if they all like you. You weren't called to get the Israelites to like you. You were called to lead them into a place that you're telling me is flowing with milk and honey. You're settling into a marriage. You're settling into a relationship. You've settled in at work. You applied for that job. You know what it was called? An entry-level position. You settled in. The bare minimum has been enough. I'll just be sustained by manna and water from rocks, and I'll just be fine with that. Just because you're good at it doesn't mean it's good for you. What are you really good at that is not good for you? What has God called you to? What has he anointed you for? But you've gotten really good at living life in the detour. Moses got so good at living life in the detour that he allowed his anger and his frustration, which we'll talk about next Sunday, to boil up so much that in the very beginning of their journey in the desert, God told them to strike a rock and that water would come out. But this time, he told Moses, I want you to speak to the rock. I want you to speak to the rock and water will come out. And Moses let his anger cloud his judgment, his frustration get in the way of the miracle God was about to do. And instead of speaking to the rock, he hit it 2 times. Because he made the mistake of assuming that if God did it back then he'll do it today. He made the mistake because water started flowing from that rock that he was in God's favor. And instead of God's grace. Moses, water is flowing for the people and the cattle because I care for Israel. Water is flowing from the rock that you hit because I am gracious, and that is an extension of my grace for you. But don't make the mistake that I am not one to be honored. And Moses dies having not entered the promised land. He actually dies within eyesight of it, unable to enter. He dies in the desert because he treated the detour like a destination. Are you treating your detour like a destination? Have you settled into places that are not your destiny? Have you cuddled up with dysfunction, and because on the surface it looks like a good relationship and you're good at it, that you've made the mistake that it's good for you? I'm just passing through. I am just passing through this year. And I will pick up the things God wants me to pick up in this year. But far be it from me to settle in and stake my claim in the desert when the land of Canaan, flowing with milk and honey and all of God's goodness, is on just the other side of that river. Stop patting yourself on the back for being good at being dysfunctional, for being good at hiding your issues, for being good at covering up the mess that is your marriage. You're good at it now. You can get in the car, shout and scream, and the second you pull up to the party, there goes the faces. And you think you have a healthy marriage. No, you have a dysfunctional marriage. You're just really good at presenting it as a healthy one. We're just really good at presenting ourselves as healthy human beings and healthy Jesus followers. And we've gotten really, really good at setting up camp in the detour. And what I love about Jesus is that he never was distracted. Like, I am very easily distracted. Like, I gotta close the door in my room. Like, I gotta have the lights at the right. If there's anything on my table, I gotta clear it off. Yeah, you guys are all making fun of my OCD, but I am very, very easily distracted. You guys should see my team on Sundays while we're doing this. There are lights here and this here and the audio here and the speakers feeding back here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm gonna do. This is a lot for me. It's a lot of stimulus. I am so easily distracted. And then Jesus refused to be distracted. Even the people who got in his way. Even his own mom. She was like, hey, Jesus, they're out of wine. He's like, Mom, it's not my time yet, woman. What does this have to do with me? I am focused here. Peter gets in his way, interrupts him in the middle of him telling what's going to happen at the cross. And Jesus, to the man he ended up handing the keys of the church to before he left, looks at Peter and he goes, get behind me, Satan. I'm headed this way. At one point, the Bible tells us that he knew he was going to the cross and that he set his face like a flint towards Jerusalem, and he would not look right and he would not look left. That he was so determined. Moses and Elijah and Jonah and Joseph and David, all the men and women that he has raised up have done amazing things, but they've all at times been distracted. Enter Jesus, who was on his mission and could not be pulled right or left. And he's not setting his face at a throne or popularity or power or influence. He set his face to the cross. He set his face towards our deliverance. That's where he looked. Hebrews chapter 12 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and every sin which clings to us so closely. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And we look now unto Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. Friends, he is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Don't settle in. I'm passing through. I'm passing through this year. I'm passing through this lifetime. I am on my way to Jesus. And if he is not my goal, and he is not the sum and the substance of my existence, then I have gotten far too comfortable in the detour, and I need to set my eyes on the destination, the person and the work of Jesus. Can I pray for you? Father God, I lift up my church. I will admit that I am one of the guilty parties today who have settled in places I was supposed to pass through. I was supposed to pass through that phase. We were supposed to pass through that season. We were supposed to pass beyond that immaturity. We were supposed to go to the next level of generosity, the next level of love, the next level of family. And we settled in the place you wanted us to learn something as we passed through. We set our eyes on Jesus. He is the lover of our soul. He is the deliverer better than Moses. And what he has done for us rings in all eternity. So we look to him, the author and the perfecter, and we ask for his Spirit. We ask for his Spirit to come upon us, to give us the ability to pass through this season, to pass through this year, to pass through the pandemic, to pass through the job loss, to pass through the diagnosis, to pass through pain and hurt from our relationships, to pass through and go into our promise. In Jesus' name, let's sing.
Come down, Spirit, when you move, make my heart pound. When you fill the room, come rest on us. Come rest on us. Come down, Spirit, when you move, make my heart pound. When you fill the room, come rest on us. Come rest on us. Come down, Spirit, when you move, make my heart pound. When you fill the room, come rest on us. Come rest on us. Come down, Spirit, when you move, make my heart pound. When you fill the room, come rest on us. Come rest on us. Come down, Spirit, when you move, make my heart pound. When you feel